This video is going to be a review of the Fox Float 32mm stanchion fork. This is the factory series. This happens to be the 120mm version, and it's the 27.5 wheel size, but whether you're buying a 29, a 26, or 27.5 wheel size, or whether you're buying the 100 or the 120, these are going to work and pretty much look exactly the same. Now this video is going to be a review, but it's also going to go into more of a discussion at the end because I have mixed feelings about this fork. Performance-wise, it's great. Love the way this fork performs. But there's another issue that I have that I want to mention that will go into my discussion for this thing. But let's talk about the performance of it and how it works. Okay, so this is the 15QR version of the fork, which if you're buying a new fork, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be buying the 15QR. Most people are not going to buy a 9mm fork anymore. So typical quick release through axle. The rebound knob is located on the bottom, as with most Fox fork. It's very positive in the clicking. This has 12 clicks, and so if you go all the way counterclockwise, that's going to be almost no rebound damping, which means the fork is going to return very quickly. I usually run it about 4 or 5 clicks from fully open, and of course the more clockwise you go on the rebound knob, the slower the fork is going to return. And if you're doing big hit stuff, if you're doing a lot of jumps and you don't want the fork to just bounce back real quick, then you would go more clockwise on this, or in other words, more rebound damping. And it gives you a little sign here that tells you, go this way for positive, in other words, adding rebound damping, or go this way, which would be counterclockwise for less rebound damping. And less rebound damping you would want to run if you want the fork to return very quickly. For example, if you're going over lots of roots, lots of little rocks, and you want the fork to set up quickly for the next hit, that's when you would run less rebound damping. And the trails that I ride just have a lot of little roots, and so I want the fork to return quickly. Now looking on the top of the fork, on the right side you've got your compression damping. And the way this works is if you go, it's a 3-click adjustment for the major adjustment. So all the way clockwise, or about in this position, is going to be fully locked out. And I only use that setting for on the road. Even on dirt roads and fire roads, I usually keep it in the middle setting. And I keep it in the middle setting actually for most of my trail riding. Now just to compare this to the this is a 2014 CTD shock. This also had 3 settings, so fully locked out, middle setting, and open. Now the difference here is these older forks, this black knob would adjust the middle setting. So you could adjust how much pro pedal or how much compression damping you had in the middle setting. On the new 2016s, the black knob in the middle now, it's not on the outside, it's in the middle, actually adjusts the open setting. And you've got about 21 clicks here, so you can really fine tune that open setting. So if you wanted to go really plush, you would back this knob out all the way counterclockwise, and that would give you a really plush setting. So what you could do is, if you're climbing on a trail, you would probably run it there in the middle setting, and then once you go on your downhill, you would open it up. Now if you feel like the middle setting is a little bit too firm for your general trail riding, you could simply go to the open position and turn this black knob to the firmer setting, or more clockwise, and that's going to give you a firmer open setting. Now I found, unlike the rear shock, it's a little more subtle, so I don't notice a big difference between the middle setting and the open setting. On my rear Fox shock, the 2016, when I go from the open to the middle, there's a much more pronounced firmness in the middle setting. Nonetheless, you can notice it in the fork. So like I said, I generally run it right in the middle setting, and if I just want a really plush ride, I would open it up to the open setting. On the left side of the fork, on the top, you've got your air cap. So this is where you're going to set your sag. And I run about 15 to 20% sag on this. So you would just use your O-ring, kind of lightly get on the bike, see how far it's moved. Now, if you're running the 100, 15% would just be 15 millimeters. 20% would be 20 millimeters. So you would adjust the O-ring. So you're going to add or remove air pressure in order to get the proper sag. Now, underneath this air cap is the beauty of this fork for the 2016 models. And if I were to take this air cap off, I've got these little volume adjusting spacers attached underneath the air cap. And you can add or remove these to change the spring ratio, which is awesome. The 100 millimeter forks come with 2 of these. The 120 comes with 1. And what that does is, if I were to remove this, it makes a more linear air spring curve. So what that means is, in the middle of the compression of the fork, it's going to be smoother, and it's going to allow you to get more travel. So if you finish a ride and you're only getting, maybe that much travel in your fork, you probably want to remove these, because you want the fork to move a little bit more into its compression as you're riding. And again, that's going to make a smoother, more plush fork. If you find that you're bottoming out, so you're doing really big hits or jumps and you're just bottoming out the fork, you would add one of these, and that's going to give more progression into the travel. So I feel like that's a really good move on behalf of Fox. And by the way, if you like doing your own maintenance, these no longer use float fluid. You put just a little bit of the Goldway oil in the top when you're changing your oil. And these are pretty easy to change the oil in. You just undo these knobs on the bottom, drop the lowers, clean everything out, add the oil. And I'll make a separate video on how to change the oil in the 2016s. I've made one for the 2014s, but it's a pretty simple process. But I did want to say that you don't need float fluid anymore. You still use float fluid in the rear shock, and the float fluid is the thicker blue type oil the Fox uses. But this one on the spring side doesn't use the float fluid. So how does this thing perform? In a word, awesome. This is a great fork as far as performance. I ended up taking out a volume spacer, because what I did was I changed the travel on this. This was the 120, and I used the air spring assembly to move this down to 100. And this is what the air spring assemblies look like. Let me take it out of the package for you so you can see it more clearly. This is the air spring assembly that came in the fork originally, and this is for 120. And what you would do is you would just drop the lowers, and there's a little retaining ring on the bottom. And I showed how to do this in a video, but it's pretty simple. It takes 30 to 45 minutes to do. It would be really awesome if Fox would make these forks to where you could just undo the top cap and maybe drop these in and not have to do that retaining ring and even drain the oil. I know that's wishful thinking, but if I could change this travel within 5 minutes by just undoing the air cap and dropping in a new one of these, that would be really cool. But like I said, it takes about 30 to 45 minutes. I like running it on my cross-country bike at 100. There may be times when I change it to 120. But back to the performance. Like I said, I removed one of the volume adjusters, and it really gave the fork that linear plush feel that I love on my style of trails and my style of riding. So this is a very smooth fork. Fox also, and I'm not going to go into the technical aspects of it. You can go on their website and look, but they've got these this way of balancing the air in the positive and negative chambers, which makes for a fork that's it's just really, really nice. The being able to put it in the middle setting does give it a pretty decent pedaling platform, but it's just a really smooth performing fork. And these forks are pretty stiff. It's 32 millimeter stanchions, so this is mainly for cross-country light trail use. But even still, I feel like this fork is pretty stiff. I run a set of carbon wheels, and that really adds to the stiffness of the front end, but you're really not going to get a lot of flex in this fork for cross-country use. So again, performs really well. I have no problems with the performance of the fork. But let me have a little discussion now on my main gripe about the 2016 forks. When it came time for me to buy this fork for the new Giant Anthem frame that I was building up, again 27.5, I wanted to try the 120. I've always wanted to see how that felt on the Anthem 27.5 to see if it threw off the balance. And I've made a separate video, you can see that. But when I called Fox to find out how much the weight difference was between the 100 and the 120, and the first time I called, they had the 100 in their specs, but the guy didn't have the 120, which I don't really understand. But anyway, he kind of gave me an answer that wasn't really that exact. So I ended up calling back a day or two later. And again, the guy didn't have the specs on the 120 in front of him, but he deduced that it was about 8 to 10 grams heavier for the 120 than the 100. And he also said that the 2016s were lightened up a little bit. So, hey, that's cool. I'll either have the same or less weight on my cross-country bike. And so I said, yeah, let's do the 120. Of course, I did buy the air spring assembly. And I bought this with the fork because I pretty much knew that I would like the 100, but I wanted to have, number one, the flexibility of the 120, but also being able to try it out and see how I liked it on my typical cross-country trails. I actually, when I built the bike up, forgot to even weigh the fork when I got it in. But I got into a little bit of a discussion with one of my viewers. He was just asking me about the weight, and I told him kind of what I found out from Fox and about what the weight was. And he got me really curious, so I said, well, I'm going to drop this thing out and weigh it just to compare it to my 2014, and this is what I found. So I'm going to weigh both of these exactly the same. The axle is installed, the crown race, and the star nut inside. And both of these have the steerer tube cut for the Giant Anthem. So again, here's the 2016 crown race, star nut inside. So let's see what we get. Okay, the 2014 CTD comes in at 3.64, and the 2016, again, everything exactly the same, we get 3.92. So a 0.28 pound difference. So that's a little over a quarter of a pound difference between the 2014 CTD and the new 2016. Now, of course, the 2014 was a 100 millimeter fork, and the 2016 is a 120 spaced down to 100. So I made another phone call to Fox yesterday, and it was kind of like one of those phone calls of, dude, what's the deal? Why is this fork heavier than the 2014s? And what's the real weight difference? So, I told the guy what I was doing. I have a YouTube channel, that kind of thing. I want to give accurate information to my viewers. So he got back on the phone and basically said that the 100 and the 120 is about a 0.1 pound difference. So what's that, 45 grams? So not the 8 to 10 grams that I was originally told by Fox. So it's more like, 40 to 45 grams. But the thing is, the 2016 32 millimeter stanchion forks are heavier than the 2014. So, and I had read that in the 34 millimeter stanchion version forks, that the 2016s were significantly lighter than 2015s. So you would think that would apply to the, to the 32, but I guess that's not the case. So, what's the deal, Fox? Why are you getting heavier on the forks? So now I'm kind of faced with the dilemma of, do I stick with the performance and add a quarter pound to my cross-country race bike, or do I just put the 2014 back on? Or do I try to at least, maybe get the 100 millimeter version and, use this on another bike or sell it just to drop a little bit of weight for, 0.1 pounds. That's not that big of a deal, but, when you add it up though, between the 2015 or 2014 and the 2016, it's it's over a quarter pound. And when guys spend $500 to drop a quarter pound off their bike, you know, it's kind of a big deal with a cross-country bike. Now, if it were my trail bike, I wouldn't care. I mean, I just don't care. But my cross-country bike is the one that, you know, I'm using it in races or, you know, going for Strava times or whatever. But just having a light bike, that's the reason you have a cross-country bike. The lighter it is, the more fun it is to ride to some degree. So anyway, that's kind of my dilemma. So I do want to say, though, that the air spring assembly is the same weight. This isn't going to change the weight difference between the 100 and 120. So clearly the 120 is heavier than the 100. 0.1 pounds, like I said, it's not that much. So anyway, you know, that'll kind of wrap up this review and discussion. It would be really awesome, by the way, if Fox made this fork in kind of the Talus version, that you could adjust the travel between 100 and 120. And it was about the same weight as the 100 or the 120. That would be really cool, or at least make the travel adjust easier to do, because it gives you a lot of flexibility. But maybe that's wishful thinking. But like I said, the performance of this fork is amazing. It's really smooth. I'm pretty lightweight, so I'm 142 pounds. So a weight difference between forks or bikes is going to be a little bit more than someone who is not quite as light as I am. So it's going to kind of depend on what your style of riding is, that kind of thing, if the weight addition is going to make that much of a difference for you. Now my Anthem is over 24 pounds. I had it under 24 before this fork, so now it's a little over 24 pounds. So, you know, I've added a little weight to it. But that'll wrap up this video, so hopefully it was helpful for you. And if you have any questions or comments, just leave them below. Thanks for watching.